The fire had started the way so many others did: lightning, wind, and dry pine needles too stubborn to let go of summer. For 2 weeks in August 2023, the Selway-Bitterroot wilderness burned like a living thing. The smoke turned the sky the color of rust. When the rain finally came, what it left behind was something no one could explain: a structure where no structure should have been, half buried under blackened soil and fallen trees. The discovery happened 3 days after containment. Aerial crews flying thermal drones over the cooling burn zone spotted a rectangular heat signature beneath the ash. At first, they assumed it was a still smoldering stump pile, but when the wind shifted, the outline sharpened into right angles, walls, a roofline. Rangers hiked in and found what the fire had revealed: a small hand-built cabin, untouched by flame, its logs sealed beneath decades of packed earth. On one wall, scorched but still visible, someone had carved a date: July 1977. That number made the hair rise on every ranger's neck. Because in July 1977, 4 campers, Daniel Price, 25, Mark and Susan Ellery, both 23, and their friend Tom Wade, 22, had vanished somewhere in this same wilderness. That summer had been the kind Idahoans still talk about. The rivers ran low, mosquitoes thick as smoke, and the forests dry enough to creak underfoot. Daniel Price was the group's anchor, a geology graduate student at the University of Montana with a taste for long expeditions. His younger cousin Mark worked in a sawmill. Mark's girlfriend Susan was a nursing intern. Tom was Daniel's college roommate, a quiet photography major who carried his 35mm camera everywhere. On July 9th, they signed the trail register at Moose Creek Ranger Station. Their plan: a 5-day loop through the Selway drainage, camping near Lake Ferndale before returning along the old logging road. They carried topographic maps, fishing rods, and enough supplies for a week. The ranger who saw them off later remembered their easy laughter. "They looked like they belonged out there," he said. Young, sunburned, sure of themselves. They were never seen again. When the group failed to return by July 16th, the families called authorities. Within a day, the Forest Service launched one of the largest search operations in Idaho history. Helicopters traced ridgelines. Volunteers hiked hundreds of miles of switchback, and divers probed lakes with sonar. They found the group's pickup truck parked near a closed service road at the southern edge of the wilderness. Inside were extra blankets, a half-empty coffee thermos, and Susan's handwriting in a notebook. "Trail steeper than expected. We'll camp lower." The first clue came 2 days later: a set of boot prints leading toward Burnt Ridge Canyon. But the tracks ended abruptly at a stream bed that had been swept clean by runoff. Rangers found a single torn tent flap snagged on a branch. The fabric matched the group's gear list. By the second week, newspapers had picked up the story: 4 campers lost in Idaho wilds. Reporters set up near the ranger station, turning the search into a small-town spectacle. Locals brought food to rescuers, and the county sheriff promised answers within days. But days stretched into weeks. August heat baked the valley, rivers shrank to trickles, and the forest went silent except for the thump of helicopter blades. When the official search ended after 31 days, all they'd found were fragments: a camera lens, a shoe sole, and a fishing lure still tied to its line. The sheriff's report closed with 6 words: "Presumed perished due to exposure." Families refused to believe it. Daniel's father funded private searches for years. Hikers claimed to see old campsites, scattered bones, flashes of metal deep in the ravines. But nothing led anywhere. The wilderness, vast and unmapped in parts, kept it secret. For decades, the story lingered like smoke. Locals passed it down at diners and trailheads, the campers who walked into the trees and never walked out. Some said they built a shelter and disappeared by choice. Others whispered about survival gone wrong. Arguments, hunger, madness. The file sat cold in a steel drawer at the Forest Service headquarters, aging alongside the photographs of 4 smiling faces stapled to the front. Then the forest burned. When rangers entered the cleared zone in 2023, the air smelled of wet ash and iron. Charred trunks stood like black pillars over a floor of silver dust. In the center of what used to be dense cedar stood the cabin. Its roof, covered in clay and pine needles, had acted like armor against the fire. Inside, the air was cooler, almost damp. A faint smell of cedar smoke and earth lingered. The walls were lined with rough-cut logs, the corners interlocked by hand-notched joints, craftsmanship that spoke of time and patience. A small window faced west, its glass long gone, but the frame intact. In the single room, rescuers found a rusted lantern, 2 enamel mugs, and a wooden crate filled with empty tin cans. On a shelf lay a mildewed notebook, its cover half-burned but legible. Selway Notes, Summer 1977. Rangers opened it under controlled light. The handwriting was Daniel Price's. The first entry, dated July 11, read, "Camped by creek. Decided to build shelter near slope for long-term study. Supplies good. Spirits high." Subsequent pages described weather conditions, rock samples, and sketches of the nearby cliffs. The tone shifted on July 14th. Mark uneasy about noise last night. Wind? Heard knocking from ridge. Might be trees. The final entry, July 19, was only 1 line. "If anyone finds this, know we were together." After that, the pages were blank. The cabin's discovery triggered an immediate lockdown of the site. Archaeologists and forensic experts arrived from Boise to document every inch. They found traces of soot layered with old dust, proof that the cabin had been sealed under sediment for years. The fire had simply stripped away what nature had buried. In one corner, near the base of the wall, a small wooden chest was unearthed. Inside were a compass, a broken watch stopped at 2:16, and 4 silver rings bound together by a strip of leather. The initials inside the bands matched the missing campers. The press conference drew national coverage. Forest fire exposes hidden cabin tied to 1977 vanishing. Reporters asked whether human remains had been found. Officials said only, "No evidence yet." But the implication was clear. The cabin had been theirs. Investigators reconstructed the group's possible movements. The trail register placed them 12 miles north of where the cabin stood. That meant they'd veered off their planned route into terrain not mapped until the early 2000s. "They might have found this valley by accident," said geologist Mark Danner. "It's a natural bow sheltered from wind, easy to miss from above, perfect hiding spot or trap." Satellite scans revealed the valley had been struck by multiple landslides over the decades. One in 1980 had covered large sections with loose soil. That could explain how the cabin was buried intact. Fire crews clearing debris found something else: half-melted glass shards and a length of rusted wire, embedded in a tree root. When cleaned, the glass turned out to be part of a camera lens. Serial numbers matched the one recovered in 1977 from the creek. Somehow, the rest of Tom's camera had ended up inside the cabin. "Maybe they made it here," Danner said. "Maybe they tried to wait out a storm." By September, the site became a full-scale excavation. Each day, the forest revealed more: cooking utensils, a tin of preserved peaches, a faded Polaroid photograph stuck to the floor by resin. The picture, though discolored, showed the 4 of them standing in front of a half-built wall. Behind them, green pines, blue sky, and laughter frozen in grain. The image was dated July 13, 1977. The existence of the photo changed everything. Until then, authorities believed the group had vanished shortly after their first camp. Now it was clear they'd survived at least 4 more days and had begun building a structure. The discovery hinted at intention. They hadn't just gotten lost, they'd decided to stay. Local news crews swarmed the small town of Lowell, Idaho, where relatives still lived. Daniel's younger sister, now in her 60s, told reporters, "He was always trying to prove something. Maybe he wanted to show he could live off the land. Maybe he thought he'd come back." Her voice trembled. "He always said the forest was patient." Guess he was right. As fall came, the wilderness began reclaiming what the fire had revealed. Moss sprouted between the logs. Rain carved new rivulets through the ash. Rangers took final casts of the carvings and sealed the cabin for winter. They agreed not to release the coordinates to prevent looting. But one last clue surfaced before snow fell. A metal identification tag, the kind used on field instruments, was found wedged in a crack above the doorframe. Stamped on it were 3 words: "Shelter finished today." The date beneath read July 21st, 1977. 2 days after Daniel's final notebook entry. The discovery forced a difficult question. If the last entry was written on July 19th, who carved the message on the 21st? When asked, forensic linguist Leah Patel said quietly, maybe they didn't all disappear the same day. By the end of 2023, the wilderness was quiet again. Snow fell over the blackened trees, covering the scars of fire. The cabin, sealed and hidden once more, waited. Scientists promised a full report in spring, but locals already had their conclusion. The forest had kept them safe, then finally decided to let them be found. And somewhere in those frozen hills, beneath layers of ash and snow, 4 rings bound by leather rested in the dark, proof that what vanishes in the wild doesn't always stay gone. Sometimes, the earth simply waits for the right moment to remember. When the snow melted the following April, the ground around the burn zone steamed like breath. Charred roots bled orange sap. The smell of wet ash hung in the air. Rangers returned to resume excavation, and this time, they weren't alone. The Idaho Historical Society had sent an entire team, archaeologists, forensic analysts, and a quiet specialist in timber aging who'd worked on Cold War bunkers. The goal wasn't simply to recover artifacts. It was to understand how the cabin could have existed undetected for nearly half the century. The first thing they noticed was that the cabin wasn't built hastily. Whoever constructed it had skill. The logs were cut cleanly with an axe, not a saw, each notch measured precisely. The foundation sat on hand-placed stone footings, perfectly level. This wasn't a survival shack, said project lead Dr. Samuel Tran. This was deliberate. Someone intended to live here for a while. Inside, ash still coated everything. Crews wore masks as they brushed away layers of soot. Beneath the floorboards, they discovered a hollow space roughly 2 feet deep, what appeared to be a root cellar. Inside it lay several sealed jars, blackened by smoke but unbroken. When cleaned, the labels were faint but legible. Beans, peaches, jerky, 1977. The air trapped inside the jars smelled faintly sweet, preserved by darkness. The more they uncovered, the more questions surfaced. There were signs of multiple fires, layers of soot, suggesting the hearth had been used long after summer ended. A square of fabric pinned under a log turned out to be a sleeve from a flannel shirt, its weave intact. DNA analysis later matched it to Susan Ellery's surviving family line. Then she was here, Dr. Tran said quietly. They all were. The public demanded answers. Press vans parked outside the ranger station again, filling the air with static and voices. Cabin mystery deepens, new evidence of long-term survival. Commentators speculated that the 4 had gone off-grid intentionally. Old friends insisted otherwise. Mark's younger brother, now gray-haired, told reporters, "He wrote me a postcard before that trip, said he'd be back before the end of the month. He wasn't running from anything." The deeper mystery wasn't why they'd stayed, but how they had vanished without a trace of fire, smoke, or noise ever being spotted from the air. Satellite imagery didn't exist back then, but even so, rangers had flown repeated searches. yet the cabin had remained invisible. That changed when a retired firefighter named Ralph Hansen came forward. He'd fought a blaze in that same valley in 1980, 3 years after the fire, the slide, and decades of forest growth had built a natural coffin around it. By May, crews recovered more objects. A pocket knife engraved with initials TW, likely Tom Wade's, a melted flashlight, a leather pouch containing graphite pencils and charcoal sketches. The drawings inside showed scenes of daily life: trees, a small fire, the outline of the cabin roof under snow. One sketch depicted 4 figures standing outside, hands linked. Another, darker in tone, showed only 3. "That one's later," Renee Kim said. She'd returned again, invited by Dr. Tran to advise on documentation. "The line works different, maybe weeks apart." Her voice wavered. "One of them didn't make it." The discovery of a possible timeline changed the entire interpretation. Investigators cross-referenced the sketches with weather records and soil analysis. The evidence suggested the group had endured through late autumn, possibly into early winter. But then something happened, an abrupt end marked by silence. In one corner of the cabin, where the floorboards met the wall, technicians found a makeshift shelf cut into the wood. Resting there was a small piece of folded paper sealed under wax. Inside, written in cramped pencil, were 12 words: "If anyone comes, we went deeper where the fire cannot find us." The handwriting matched Daniel's. The phrase baffled everyone. Deeper. Did he mean underground? A cave? A ravine? Teams combed the nearby valley for clues. 2 miles north, at the base of a basalt outcrop, they found a narrow fissure hidden by brush. Air flowed cold from within. When a ranger crawled inside with a headlamp, he found a small chamber large enough for 2 people to sit. The walls bore soot marks, as though torches had burned there once. Scattered along the floor were fragments of tin cans and charcoal. Further in, the tunnel narrowed. The ceiling sloped until it became impassable. On one wall, a faint carving caught the light. 4 lines crossed. Beneath it, the letters DP. "It's his mark," Renee said, when shown photos. "He was mathing, even to the end." The canyon's geology made further exploration dangerous. The fire had destabilized everything, and tremors shook the slopes weakly. Crews sealed the entrance for safety, promising to return once conditions stabilized. But by June, heavy rains triggered another landslide that buried the fissure completely. Whatever lay beyond was gone again. Meanwhile, analysis of the soil under the cabin revealed something unexpected: traces of calcium phosphate, consistent with bone, but no identifiable fragments. "It could be anything," the forensic lead said. "Animals, food, or worse. The heat of fire and time erase most things." Still, the discovery made the families uneasy. "We don't need remains to know," said Susan's sister. "We just needed the forest to remember them." When summer arrived, the area transformed. Grasses pushed through ash, wildflowers bloomed around the excavation. The forest seemed determined to heal itself. For the first time in decades, new trees rooted in the scar. Scientists installed motion cameras to monitor regrowth. One night, a camera caught a curious reflection, an outline of light moving across the valley. Some said it was a ranger's headlamp. Others swore it resembled 4 figures walking single file across the burn. The footage went viral, of course. The internet called it the Selway Ghost March. Park officials dismissed it as pareidolia, a trick of dust and lens flare. Still, it added another layer to the myth. Through it all, Renee kept working quietly. She cataloged every item, every note. One evening, while photographing the interior walls, she noticed something faint beneath the soot, an etching hidden under layers of smoke stain. Using angled light, she revealed words carved with a knife tip. "We built it to last." She pressed her hand against the grain of the log. The sentence felt both promise and warning. In late July, the research team hosted a private memorial at the site. Family members arrived from across the country. A wooden bench was placed beside the cabin foundation, carved with the names of the 4 campers. Someone hung a Polaroid copy of the recovered photo above the doorway. As dusk settled, wind whispered through blackened trees. Dr. Tran spoke softly. Nature hides things not out of cruelty, but protection. Maybe it knew they needed time to rest. No one disagreed. After the ceremony, Renee stayed behind. The forest was still smoldering in patches, the air thick with the scent of pine resin. She switched off her flashlight and let her eyes adjust. Through the darkness, she could see the faint silhouette of the valley beyond, the same path they must have walked 46 years earlier. For the first time, she understood what drew them here. The silence wasn't empty. It was absolute presence, the kind that absorbs everything, even memory. She whispered into the quiet, "You're found now." The fire kept its promise. Somewhere in the trees, a gust rose and then stilled, like an exhale. Weeks later, the final report was released. The conclusion read, "Evidence supports voluntary shelter building, long-term survival, and eventual entrapment due to geological collapse. Cause of death undetermined." It wasn't closure, but it was something. The families accepted it with grace. The park decided to leave the cabin where it stood, sealed under protective tarps, to let the forest reclaim it once more. In the last paragraph of the report, Dr. Tran quoted Daniel's notebook, "If anyone finds this, know we were together." That line became the plaque inscription on the bench. And when autumn returned, the wilderness did what it always does. It grew quiet, holding its stories beneath bark and soil. Tourists stopped by the ranger station to ask where the fire had burned, where the cabin stood. The rangers would only point north and say, "Out there, past the ridge. You won't see it, but it's there." The leaves began to change color again. The forest had almost hidden the scars. Green returned where the ground had been black. Charred trunks lay like fossils half buried in new growth. It was as though the wilderness was rewriting its story, layering life over loss. But for the people who had spent months inside that story, the questions only deepened. In September 2024, a research team from the University of Idaho returned to conduct final documentation of the cabin before it was sealed for preservation. They brought advanced scanning equipment, ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR imaging, and a 3D drone to map every inch. The scans revealed something astonishing. Beneath the cabin, at a depth of about 12 feet, was another rectangular void. The space measured 8 by 10 feet, almost the same footprint as the structure above it. At first, they assumed it was a collapsed cellar, but the edges were too clean, the angles too deliberate. "It's like they built a mirror of their shelter underground," said Dr. Tran. A new dig was approved. Within days, they reached a layer of compacted soil mixed with wood ash. When the team broke through, a hollow opened, a chamber lined with hand-cut planks, its roof supported by logs stripped of bark. Inside, the air was cold and still, untouched since the late 1970s. They lowered a light. Dust floated like snow. On the far wall, something gleamed, the rusted frame of a metal cot. On it lay a folded blanket and a tin box. The box held 4 objects: a pocket knife, a silver ring, a small compass, and a strip of film negative sealed in wax. Renee Kim, once again part of the field team, unrolled the negatives with trembling fingers. Against the backlight, ghostly images appeared, the same 4 faces seen in the recovered Polaroid, but this time, seated inside the cabin, lit by lantern glow. Behind them, a message scrawled on the wall read, "Shelter 1 finished, Building 2 below." "Building 2, Dr. Tran whispered. They made this deliberately. The revelation changed everything. The cabin wasn't just a refuge, it was part of a plan. Daniel's geology background suddenly made sense. He had known the region's soil composition, how to carve shelter from compact loam without collapse. They hadn't stumbled into survival. They had engineered it. When word leaked, public fascination reignited. Lost campers were building underground bunker. One headline read. Others speculated it was a Cold War hideout, a doomsday project, even a secret environmental experiment. But the truth remained simple and stranger. They'd built a world within the forest, far from anyone, and then vanished into it. Inside the lower chamber, researchers found a wooden crate stamped with faded lettering, medical. Inside were glass bottles, gauze, and an old nurse's kit. Susan's handwriting was visible on the labels: antiseptic, iodine, bandages. Another box contained graphite pencils and torn notebook pages, many water-stained but readable. One page, dated September 2, 1977, read, "The fire started on the ridge today. We saw smoke. Daniel says we stay underground until it passes. Mark wants to leave. Tom's fever is worse." The next entry, written in a different hand, Daniel's, was shorter. "No way out. Roof sealed. We wait." It was the last dated note ever found. As autumn advanced, investigators pieced together what must have happened. A lightning strike in late August 1977 had ignited a small, undocumented wildfire near Burnt Ridge. It burned for days before dying naturally, but strong winds and falling debris could have collapsed part of the slope, trapping the cabin and its underground annex. When heavy rain followed that week, the sediment sealed everything shut. "It wasn't just wilderness that took them," Renee said in a documentary interview. "It was time itself. The mountain folded around them like a blanket." When the public exhibit of artifacts opened that winter, thousands came. The display included the original notebook, Daniel's compass, and the recovered photograph. The curators recreated the cabin interior with timbers from the site, dimly lit as it might have been on those last nights. Visitors described the space as hauntingly peaceful. In one corner, a small plaque quoted the last line of Daniel's first entry: "If I can map it, I can teach it." But the story wasn't done. In March 2025, spring meltwater eroded another section of hillside near the burn zone, exposing a narrow tunnel leading from the lower chamber toward a dry creek bed. Rangers followed it and found that it ended abruptly in a wall of collapsed rock. Embedded in that rock was something metallic, a camera, crushed but intact enough to read the engraving, "Property of T. Wade." Inside the film compartment, to everyone's shock, was one roll of undeveloped film. The moisture had destroyed most of it, but a few frames survived. When processed, they revealed images of the underground chamber under construction. In one photo, Daniel stood waist-deep in a pit, shovel in hand, grinning up at the lens. In another, Susan knelt beside a lantern, sketching something on the dirt floor, a spiral with 4 points. Renee stared at the print for a long time. She drew it again, she whispered. The spiral appeared identical to the symbol carved into the cabin wall above the word "me" from the notebook. 4 arms, each ending in a point like a compass rose. Dr. Tran nodded slowly. She was marking where they'd been, not just physically, but in time. Each line, a direction they took, a decision that kept them here. A year later, the site was officially declared a protected historical landmark. No further excavation would be allowed. The cabin and its twin below were sealed once more, their entrances reinforced, their coordinates removed from public maps. Nature began to reclaim what had been uncovered: ferns curling through cracks, deer wandering through ash. Every year, around the anniversary of the fire, a group of hikers and family members gathered at the overlook above the valley. They brought flowers and left them by the marker that now stood there. Selway Shelter, 1977 to 2023. The forest never forgets. During one such gathering, Renee gave her final interview. The documentary crew filmed her standing at the ridge as evening light poured over the valley. "What draws people here isn't tragedy," she said quietly. "It's the idea that something so human could last this long." They weren't trying to disappear. They were trying to build a place that couldn't be erased. The fire didn't destroy it. It revealed it. She turned toward the smoke-colored horizon, where the trees swayed in unison. We think of the wilderness as taking people, but maybe sometimes it keeps them safe until we're ready to understand. That night, the crew camped nearby, long after the generators were turned off and the desert cold crept in. A faint wind carried through the burned valley. Some swore they heard soft, rhythmic sounds, hammering, the creak of rope, distant laughter fading into the hills. It could have been the shifting of timber, or the echo of memory caught in the canyon's shape. But it felt real enough to make everyone pause. When morning came, Renee returned to the overlook alone. She left one of the film photographs, the image of the four friends smiling beside their unfinished cabin. At the edge of the memorial bench, the paper fluttered once in the breeze, then settled, pinned by a small stone. She whispered, "You built it to last." And somewhere below, beneath 40 years of soil and silence, the twin shelters held steady, hand-cut logs and earth intertwined, proof that human intent can sometimes outlast even fire. When she finally walked away, the wind rose again, carrying the smell of pine and distant smoke, whispering through the valley like a voice that had waited almost half a century to be heard. If anyone finds this, it seemed to say, "Know we were together."